Hello and welcome to the Cup of Triathlon podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors oxygenaddict.com and fueledbycake.com. Now then, this week we've got a slightly different format. I'm not joined by my wonderful co-host Helen Murray this week. I am in fact recording this ahead of time because I'll be on my hollybobs as you guys listen to this at the moment. So today we're doing a straight interview with a very, very interesting chap indeed. We are joined by Dr. Will Mangar from Indurance. So Will, I'd like to welcome you to the Cup of Tri podcast. How are you today?
Very well, thanks Rob. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Now then, for everyone listening, I met Will at the Tri Expo. Will was launching his company, which as I said is called Indurance, and I think it's going to be of great interest to a lot of the people who are listening because essentially Indurance offer blood testing services for athletes and essentially age group athletes and triathletes as well. And through these blood tests we can get blood profiles that tells a lot of things about the current state of our health, which is great in an ongoing sense if we're feeling we want to keep a track of what's going on in our bodies. It's also great if we've got any problems at the moment involving overtiredness or overtraining, which I think one or two of our listeners might have experienced in their time as long-distance focused triathletes will. So yeah, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and where you come from and essentially how you've ended up running your company?
Well, I've got to congratulate you on being able to sum up the whole thing in a few lines, Rob. You did a fantastic job, actually.
Thanks very much, mate. I'm available for...
I'm going to turn around to our PR and marketing people and say, can we get this guy on board, actually? Because we're always looking for that really good elevator pitch, you know, the kind of 30 seconds that you can tell people, because we've been doing this for a couple of years, and I think last 2 years we've really tried to find in a nutshell exactly what we do, and it's the biggest thing for us. You know, we've been really struggling with getting that succinct little description about profiling, and I have to say that's probably one of the best descriptions of the whole thing we've come across. So,
is that pretty much accurate then? Have I kind of covered the main basis? Really, you're there to offer a...
Yeah, I think so. I think you've put it really well. And in actual fact, you know, like with everything in life, whenever you live, breathe, get involved with any startup or any idea or, you know, principle or project, you pioneer an innovation. Sometimes when you live and breathe it, you kind of don't see the wood for the trees, and you don't really step back and look at the outside picture. And what's lovely for us is when we speak to, you know, people who endear themselves to what we do or are attracted by the idea, they've got this amazing knack of being able to just get a handle on it and say, guys, this is what you do. You know, this is what you do, isn't it? I say, yeah, you're right. This is what we do, you know, and it's very easy when you get involved in the science and the testing and the biomarkers and things to kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. But it often takes, you know, people to just to say, actually, you know, coaches and allied, you know, health professionals just to sort of put it in terms like you've done.
Cool. Now, I was really interested when we met at the Tri Expo because obviously the ability to access private blood testing is something that I'd heard my American coaching colleagues talking about, and I'd heard American Ironman athletes talking in interviews, in podcasts mainly, about, you know, dude, you want to go and get your bloods tested? You can have like a hematocrit tested for $20 at the doctor. And I was thinking, God, what an amazing system they have over there that they can just go in the doctors and ask for a blood test. And I mean, my own particular interest in at the time was that I trained myself into a hole over one of the winters and was so drained, so overtired. I was just convinced at the time that more was better, and I wasn't particularly surrounding myself with the best examples of people who are living a balanced life.
Absolutely.
And I ended up at my GP's and said to him, look, man, something's not right here. And he just said to me, well, it's clear to me what's not right. You're doing all this stupid training. Go over and take a month off. And I was like, well, you know what? My GP at the time was possibly 22 stone, and he smelt of cigarettes. And I was thinking, I don't think I really want to be taking your advice on it. Now, obviously, in retrospect, his advice was correct. You need to back off the training a bit, and you need to rebalance your life. But if I could have had access to something who could have said, right, we'll do some blood tests and we'll check out these hormone levels and this, that, and the other, it would have given me a scientific understanding of why his advice was probably correct.
It's really interesting what you said, actually, because I think sometimes we don't see that. We don't put things into context. And often, I mean, when I was training at high level, when I was, my basic background is I was age group triathlete in the mid-2000s and used to finish all the bike legs of the triathlon 5 minutes faster than everyone else, and then promptly expire halfway through the run and get overtaken by everyone because I couldn't, accommodate my ego on the bike. So I did the kind thing to myself and went into time trialing, and I was fairly, relatively successful in that. I had a good team. I used to ride for some guys at InGear. They were a great squad. But I had a similar thing, and I found that, I was perpetually overtraining, and you and I probably have suffered with what the majority of self-coached age group athletes suffer with, which is they perceive a degradation in performance or fitness as a marker that they are doing too little. And
absolutely,
they end up doing more, and it's just a self-perpetuating cycle. And I think often it takes somebody to grab us by the scruff of the neck and say, you stupid fool, you silly man, what are you doing, and people used to, I had my, back in the days and, work colleagues and say, you're doing too much and things like that. But for me, my kilter, my rock was my wife. My wife always used to say to me, well, you don't look well, you're doing too much. And I was like, oh, how could you, possibly know? You're not a cyclist, high level.
You're not one of us.
You're not one of us.
You're not struck by the madness.
But this is right. A couple of weeks later, I said, you know what? I don't feel too good. I think you're right. And I think we're at this situation now in sport, particularly cycling and triathlon, where we're over the honeymoon period with regards to let's smash it, let's do as much as we can, let's blow the doors off it. Because when, like you say, when you go to an expo or an exhibition or a show, everything is much geared to, performance, geared to going faster, doing more, productivity. And we're now starting to see some sort of cracks appearing, and people are getting tired. They're almost ashamed of the fatigue. They're ashamed to admit they feel tired. What happens is they perceive that as a weakness or an inability to accommodate the training they've been set down, or what they perceive as the expected level of training, within popularised media, magazines, websites, etc., or what their colleagues or training partners might do. And there's almost like a kind of psychological elephant in the room with that. They somehow perceive that they're not quite the ticket, or they won't make the grade, so they try and do more and more. And when they do more and more, what happens is they naturally start overreaching, and this whole supercompensation concept of training falls on its knees, and you get the overtraining syndrome, the chronic fatigue. And I think what's very nice about the principle of profiling, I know we'll touch on that, is that it's a very good objective marker of being able to demonstrate to people why they might be feeling like they do. Because, you might be able to do, overtraining stress scores on people, questionnaires and inventories, and get an idea if somebody is overtrained and fatigued. But somehow that subjective assessment that's made doesn't quite cut the mustard with people. They need more convincing or more evidence. And in this day of kind of data and numbers and stuff like that, with, training stress scores and watts per kilo and heart rate and HRV and stuff like that, people sometimes want the data. So it's very nice for us when we can marry up or synchronize somebody's feelings or capture their general state of readiness for training with the numbers. When we talk with them, on a consultation, either by video or by telephone after a profile. It's nice when people say, look, I've been feeling pretty dreadful and ropey. I haven't got everything out of myself for some time. And looking at my profile, I can quite understand that. What's nice for us is we can say, well, actually, you know, you might be finding that you need to spend some more time thinking about this type of nutrition, thinking about strategic rest. And when we practice something called strategic rest, which isn't just sitting on a couch eating Pringles and watching some football, you know, it's literally, it's doing strategic rest, actual active rest, which is stuff like breathing protocols and just being aware of the kind of subjective sensations, almost stuff like mindfulness, which is good. And the studies show that people recover quicker when they do use techniques like that, because it's the yin and the yang to the training. You know, for an hour you're doing kind of maximal intervals, micro intervals, 30 seconds or 2 by 20 minute sweet spot episodes, and then an hour later you're doing some form of active breathing recovery. And there's all sorts of stuff we can use to get people back in the room where they want to be.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, the idea of, and again, I think there's an interesting thing for you and me here, because we've essentially both managed to build businesses out of the fact that, left to our own devices, we're actually not very good at following our own advice. And so most of the people that come to me come for the same reason that they come to you, because when they're training themselves and they're coaching themselves, they coach themselves into a hole. The first time they get a plan off me, they look at it and they go, is that it? Why am I only doing, you know,
X amount of hours
for this? Exactly. And people look at it and they think, well, part of the strength of it is you get a relationship with a person, and they phone me up and say, well, I'm thinking I'm going to do this. And I say, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever thought of. You know, I'll give you an example. The other day, a friend of mine texted me and he said, I'm thinking about doing a sprint triathlon the day before the Half Outlaw, because it's a qualifier for the sprint triathlon event in Europe for next year. And I was like, just replied, seriously? And he was like, yeah, pretty stupid idea, huh? But people need someone to bounce that idea off and to kind of reflect back to them their own most excited thinking.
I think
anyway,
go on. Sorry. I think, Rob, people panic. I think people panic, and that's what happens. They look at what they're doing and they just think this isn't, you know, good enough. And when somebody turns around to them in a position of power, expertise, and, you know, relative specialism like you are or I do, and they turn around and say, you need to do half of what you do in order for you to go faster. There's no accident why we won the Tour de France in 2012 by going slow. You know, Brad Wiggins won the Tour de France by going slow to go fast. If you look at the greatest athletes, they put the beans in when it counts, and you know, power when it counts, but rest when it counts as well. And I think there's no accident why the hallmarks of the greatest athletes are proficiently and institutionally or constitutionally lazy people. When they are not training, you tell them to rest for a week, that you won't get an argument from them. But when it comes to putting the training in, they will put their heart and soul into it. I think that's what happens with us. You know, we do less, we do more than we should be doing less.
Now, you mentioned there, you know, the whole Brad Wiggins thing, and you've got some insight into the world of cycling, which I think will be interesting to the listeners. You were the doctor on the Tour of Britain, is that correct? Have I got my facts right?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the second year I'll be race doctor for the Tour of Britain. Last year it's the Friends Life Tour of Britain and the Friends Life Women's Tour, and also going to be the race doctor for the Brad Wiggins hour attempt next month, which is very exciting for me.
Very exciting, yeah. Now tell us what your role is going to be. Firstly, on the Tour of Britain, are you going to be the guy who hangs out the car window at 45 miles an hour, putting putting plasters and bandages on people's knees.
Yeah, and that's just on the way to the race. But yeah,
awesome.
I did that. I mean, that's what I've done now for the last couple of years, and it is good because I think, my background, Rob, is that I'm a generalist. I'm a general practitioner with a special interest in sports medicine, and I think that role very much you need to kind of come from a generalist point of view, because during the race you might be dealing with a case of road rash or sunstroke or even diarrhea and vomiting or something like that, gastroenteritis. And then after hours, when you're at the hotel, you set up a little clinic and see the guys, and everything can be like musculoskeletal injuries through to insomnia, through to just general tummy bugs and stuff like that. So it's just this little tiny micro environment of what the whole kind of medical generalist sort of GP surgery is really. It's a really, really interesting role.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fascinating. And how did the gig working with Brad Wiggins for his hour attempt come about?
Just with my continued affiliation with the guys who are the management behind the Tour of Britain, which is Sweet Spot, which is Mick Bennett over at Sweet Spot, and they do a lot of the events for Tour of Britain Women's Tour, as well as the London Classic as well. So that's what I do, and I think it is great because it's really nice to be involved with professional elite level athletes, because you get a real insight into how the whole thing works really, and to see the machine change every day is fascinating, and to watch how the whole thing sets up, how teams work, and the etiquette and respect that you get between teams and between riders is wonderful to see. It's very peculiar to cycling. It's something very endearing to the sport, that there's a nice kind of atmosphere, and it's amazing the way the thing moves from city to city every day, and how the whole thing just sets up, shuts down within 24 hours. And I suspect because of the Tour de France, it's even more obvious,
Now, you mentioned earlier, one of the interesting phrases you just used was that Brad Wiggins won the Tour by going slow so he could go fast. Can I get you to expand on that?
I think without looking at the splits for the time trial, I'm working off memory now, but I think he probably, through the whole Team Sky, Brad Wiggins philosophy, aggregation of marginal gains, but it's also being able to ride the perfect time trial, being able to ride a negative split. And I think that's something that we do try to educate UK-based athletes with, particularly time trialist Ironman athletes, being able to gradually incrementally increase the pace of an event, whether it's a run or whether it's a bike or something like that. It's very easy to get sent into a steady state effort like a 40k time trial, and then find that you haven't got the required pace for the second part, on the way back, and you just you get your pace judgment wrong. And I suspect if you got a cohort of time trialists, even at tour level, and actually looked at their power outputs in the second half of the race compared to the first part of the race, you'd find there was an inverse relationship to those guys who are in the podium compared to the guys lower down the order. The guys at the top of the leaderboard are the ones who probably have output a marginally increased power over the first half, obviously conditions permitting. And I think Brad Wiggins used that to his advantage, because he was obviously dialed into that aspect of riding a negative split. And I think it's probably something very constitutional within UK-based riders who've grown up on a diet of time trialing, etc., who just understand that thing.
Yeah, cool. So listen, We've covered a bit of the background on you now and how you've ended up going from being a GP to moving into essentially setting up a company that's partly based in the things that you've done your whole life in the medical background, but doing something that you know is lights your fire. It's what you're really passionate about.
Yeah.
You've now set up this company, Indurance, and essentially, we'll talk a little bit about what the athlete experience is going to be if they use your service, if we can. From what I saw at the expo, you guys have got these cool little kits that somebody buys one from you through the internet, you post it out to them, they take a blood sample and send it back to you, and then you do your little magic analysis on it. What happens after that?
Essentially, it's absolutely right. I mean, we've got a couple of ways the way we work things. I mean, we've got the home testing kits, which are called Pico kits. I mean, there's a fork and a path. And those are what we had when we launched, because we launched back in February. And we did it very much like the kind of Starbucks coffee brand, where they launched the little sachets of Starbucks coffee in the box. Just give people that taster, because we're originally going to move out and launch with the big profiles, which we've just launched, but we thought we'd come out with the tasters first, so people got a bit of an understanding and an idea on what the idea of quantification, the biomarkers and profiling and all this thing was, because the most important thing with this is that it's a real conceptual shift in people's thinking. And going back to what you said at the beginning of the interview, that this is something that the guys over the pond, the guys over in the States, are far more familiar with and savvy with, the idea of self-quantification and testing. And that's because whether you're in kind of sports medicine or conventional traditional medicine, there's a model methodology that's usually applied to assessment of somebody who might have a problem like fatigue or just wants some testing done. In the States, it's far more, acceptable for an athlete or an individual to access investigations first, whether it's some form of scan or blood testing or, a performance testing, and then speak to the specialist, whether it's a sports medic or somebody else, once they've had their tests done. And I think UK traditional models is usually there's some form of dialogue with the specialist first, and then the specialist will say, well, I think you need this, this and this testing. So there's a kind of inverse relationship compared to what, perhaps in Europe or in the States. And I think what we've tried to do is, rather than just the idea of people purchasing or accessing blood testing, is that we give individuals a roadmap, an atlas and a methodology to how to, provide some form of self-quantification over the season. So how they can test, when they would test, what they would test, and what the results mean. So very much people can fly solo in that respect. And we're here to provide people with assistance. We're always here to provide consultations with athletes once they've had some form of profile done. And when they have the profile, they will have a full report, which our standard is that report gives them no room for doubt. They completely understand what they've tested, why they should test it, and what they do in the future if they need to retest, and what those numbers mean for that athlete in context. And if they go away from that report and say, I get it, I understand, then for us that's our kind of product, developed fully. But we're always here to consult with athletes. And I think that's nice, because that's also a very important tool, as well as the athletes having tested, whether it's for reassurance purposes or for, optimization of performance. It's also good for them to have access to the medic, to be able to ask questions, to ask things, just to go through a list of things and just have that extra layer of reassurance.
Yeah, I see. So in an ideal world, would an athlete have, say, from your point of view, would they have several tests done over the course of a season? Would they have, say, 3 or 4 done at a couple monthly intervals? Yeah. And then you kind of build up a picture of what's going on in their blood, the biomarkers, the hormones and things like that, and watch how it changes across a season. Is that kind of what's happening at the top level of, Team Sky type medical backup?
I mean, I think what happens within pro level sport, I think it's, I think it's very much customized according to athletes, and I suspect for confidentiality reasons we don't know really what happens, what level of frequency of testing there is. But I mean, what we've done is we've looked at the evidence, and we've collated a huge volume of sort of journal academia, and looked at the literature and tried to formulate some form of framework for athletes. And I think what we've got to remember is that what people expect out of their system, out of their body, is very much different to what people expected out of their body 10, 15 years ago. The culture of acceptance now that you have to do a 10-hour day at work plus run a family plus do 10 to 15 hours of training a week is your remit. Nobody frowns at that now. That's just what is acceptable if you want to be a, athlete of adequate decency in sport. But that level of bandwidth really hasn't been accommodated within athletes, and the evolution of athletes hasn't caught up with that yet. Within this very short space of time over the last few years, we're asking a lot out of our body and out of our biology to be able to overlay and accommodate this level of training, because an elite level or professional level athlete has far more bandwidth than an amateur recreational athlete, because that professional athlete may or may not have the need for looking after a family, being involved with a family, plus a full-time job. So if you add up the number of hours an recreational athlete does with a full-time job, plus family time, plus difficulty with sleep maybe, plus training, then you can see that level of training stress is perhaps 3 or 4-fold that of an elite or professional level athlete. So therefore, perhaps it's a recreational athlete that needs more safeguarding, surveillance, monitoring, an assessment of potential fatigue and overtraining and things like that.
Yeah, it's absolutely... what you said there is so true. It's not the training stress that does most amateur athletes in. It's the life stress surrounding the extra stuff. And then we're trying to do the same kind of training, or a pared down version of the same kind of training we read about professionals doing, and our systems just can't handle the overall stress, let alone training stress. Now, what sort of, I mean, I'm really interested in this from a science point of view. Yeah. What sort of markers would you see changing in let's take an example of a middle-aged person doing an Ironman who's working the 50, 60-hour week. They've got a busy family life. Yeah. They're trying to get all the training in. They're getting up at 4:30 or 5 to do the turbo sessions. They're really cramming this in because they want to qualify for Kona. What would you see in terms of, let's say they get themselves to that point where they're classically overtrained, they're really knackered, they're doing loads of training, but the performances are just not up to what we'd hope for. What would you see in their blood? What would these markers actually be that you can look at and go, well, clearly there's a marker that shows there's a problem here?
I think it's, what we tend to do is we tend to divide up the profile. I mean, if the athlete was, say, 20 weeks out from a big qualifier or Kona or something like that, we'd take, for example, we do a long course profile. So a long course profile can be done at 2 points. One is 20 weeks out from the event, and then one 6 to 8 weeks before, just to make sure that everything is pinging as it should be. But looking at that profile, we tend to divide it into 3 main areas. One is the red blood cell function. Second area is the kind of hypothalamic pituitary axis of hormone production. And the third area is the kind of whole vitamin area, nutritional biomarkers. So what you look at on the first area is this kind of red cell ability. So the red cell function, I try and analogize this with, because we speak to so many guys who are in tech, they're all, techies,
yeah.
They get it. And I thought I need a real good analogy to be able to explain to people the way the blood works. I said, well, look at it as in the front and back end. So they all get that. You say, look at the front end of a website and the back end. They get that. So I say, your blood's just the same. So you've got the front end. The front end is what your muscles, your working tissues and muscles see. So that's your hemoglobin. And your hemoglobin is obviously the component of red blood cells which does the work. It's the working tissue of the red blood cell. It carries the oxygen from the outside air through your blood to your working tissues and muscles. So if that is de-optimized, then before you get out of the room, that's going to be an issue for you to be able to deliver oxygen to your muscles effectively. So that's one of the first things we look at. It's a very buoyant and kind of changeable biomarker and metric in an athlete because it goes up and down. And people sometimes query that and get concerned with that. And we know that it's okay for that hemoglobin to go down over the course of a season and to go down after training, because as you train more and more and get fitter, your system produces more serum and plasma in the blood, so you get the kind of dilutional effect in the blood. So you've got more and more red blood cells as you're getting fitter, but you're producing more and more kind of water within the blood. So what happens is you get this false reduction in hemoglobin. People say, oh, that's a worry. I say, no, it's okay. It's just dilutional. We repeat it after a period of rest and it comes back up again.
I see. And is that the same as hematocrit?
Hematocrit will do the same thing as well. And we get people who...
That's the actual number of red blood cells.
So that's if you've got a
percentage of red blood cells.
If you've got a milliliter of blood and counted the concentration of red blood cells, that's what the number you'd get. And again, because of history and cycling, people get ever so excited about hematocrit. And they say, what's the hematocrit? I've got to know. And I say, well, forget about it. I'm not interested, because I think we do get it. We have one eye on it, but for us, it's not an actionable biomarker. Because
it's not like you can go, well, your hematocrit's really low. Here's
do this. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even the athletes who say, look, I'm at Tenerife this week, or I'm going to the altitude centre. Not everyone responds to altitude training with an increase in their hematocrit. It's a small percentage. Most people get benefit from altitude training by increasing mitochondria concentration, vascularity, etc. of muscles. But
that's interesting. But so it's only a small percentage of people whose hematocrit actually goes up at altitude.
I think looking at some of the studies, not everybody is a responder. Not everybody is a responder. You get responders and non-responders, and it's quite a complex kind of area. But I think you do get some people who get disappointed because their hematocrit goes down after altitude training, and I'm not an expert on it, and I know the guys at the altitude training centre would be more familiar with it, but I do know a lot of athletes get disappointed because it goes down, but they experience improvement in their performance racing, and they feel fitter, but they can't marry up that improvement in performance with the hematocrit. So I think it's not a binary thing. It's far more complex than...
Yeah, it's all down to the mitochondria and the vascularity and things like that changing as well, and that's much harder to measure, I'd imagine, isn't it?
I think it is. So going back to your question, so that's the red cell, and we look at the back end of the red cell. I get a bit more excited about that. Unless an athlete is overtly anemic on their hemoglobin, then, that's okay. If they're overtly anemic, we take action. We'll either plug them into one of their private healthcare providers if they're covered, or we'll refer them to their doctor for further testing.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's something that is what we call red flag, and we'll get that looked at. But the back end of the red cell function, you're looking at stuff like active B12, red cell folate, iron storage, because those are the actionable building blocks of the red blood cell. So those are the things that if they are low, you can do something about quite easily by optimization of diet, optimization of supplementation. And for me, I try and do everything in a organic and whole food way. So if I can optimize an athlete through just, going to the right aisles in the supermarket, that for me is important because I think that's essential. So those are the things with the red cells that we can really work on.
Interesting. So that's a really simple fix, wasn't it? Because I remember one of the things I said to you at the expo was, let's say you check somebody's blood markers and their testosterone is low. Surely the answer isn't give them one of those androgel sachets to rub on and increase their testosterone, because we've all read stories on Slow Twitch of like the 60-year-old guy who's got the body of a 25-year-old, and you're like, come on, dude, that's not
a 25-year-old man or woman. I think it's right actually, because it goes on to the second thing that we look at. I mean, we look at three big things in the profile. The second thing is your hormone function, and I think you've got, without getting too scientific about it and keeping it fairly low tech, you've got three parts to your hormone chain, your hormone roadmap. So you've got, in your brain, you've got your hypothalamus, which is the kind of bus driver of your brain, really. The very sort of low, very kind of antiquated, ancient part of the brain that does all the bits and bobs of your body that you can do subconsciously without having to worry, like temperature control, etc. But that guy, that hypothalamus, communicates with the little gland at the bottom of the brain called the pituitary gland, and that pituitary gland then communicates with other parts of the body. And what we really focus on is the adrenal glands, which communicates with the pituitary, the testicles in men, and obviously ovaries in women as well, because those three areas, adrenals, testicles and ovaries, are the areas that also secrete important hormones, and also the thyroid gland as well, because it's very easy for an athlete to train, overtrain, to actually cause some form of disruption or dysfunction within that train of hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, or thyroid, or testicles. And you'll see that with what you said, which is testosterone deficiency, adrenal dysfunction or fatigue, or thyroid deficiency, etc.
Yeah, and that's great, because for the athletes, that's where the rubber meets the road, really, isn't it? It's a simple case of, in layman's terms, if you train too hard, too much for too long, your brain is going to react by having a disruption in these systems, and that's what's making you either feel really overtired, or it's what's making your performances really, really poor. Yes. And you can then say, presumably, your fix for this is X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And it becomes a very simple and easy, relatively quick fix.
Absolutely, and we've seen a lot of cases of this, Rob, and what we don't do is we don't say go to your doctor and ask them to give you this or take this. We don't prescribe. We're not a prescription service. We do not give medicines or anything like that. I mean, what we do is we give advice, particularly around change of lifestyle dynamics, nutritional interventions, and, as I said before, active and strategic rest and recovery. And we encourage athletes to retest, because often this is the proof in the pudding. It's the objective evidence they need to marry up with how they feel to what's actually going on inside them, looking inside. Because if you've got an athlete who's debating, am I being weak, or am I really feeling tired, or am I just, not up to it? When you can actually put an arm around them and say, hey, look, this is just not you thinking or, being weak in some way. There's an issue here, and this is how to repair it so that you can continue to engage in the sport you love that brings you so much happiness. Because for us,
that's absolutely it will, isn't it? That's the absolute key thing for people. You've got to be able to say, it's not weak to take rest when you need it, it's smart to take rest when you need it, and in fact you'll get stronger in the medium and long term by applying that appropriate rest. But in society we get fed this idea that, we should be training all the time, we should be doing more, we should be able to do more, and he does this. So I think that's so awesome. You can provide essentially scientific medical backup to this area of the same thing we do in coaching, which is saying the first thing we're going to do is we're going to plan in the rest and the recovery from training before we plug in how much training you're going to get. Sorry, I cut you off.
No,
I think I'm going to say there's a third area. Isn't there?
No, I think you put it really well. I think it's a few kind of innovators. I mean, guys like yourself who are just kind of in this sort of second quartile now of endurance training and triathlon, where we're starting to see people being unhappy, see people unhappy at home, and kind of P45s flooding in and divorce papers, because I know that's doom and gloom, but we see it. We see.
No, it's so true.
We see people prioritise their training and they get themselves ill. I don't mean prioritise their training; they just do the wrong type. And they're not taking the rest and recovery, and it's having impact actually on a serious level in their lives. So I think the future really very much is a kind of hand-in-hand partnership with, coaches being able to prescribe sensible training like you do, with prioritising rest and recovery, then looking at the actual conditioning, but somebody in the background to be able to make sure the engine management systems are all working, that kind of regular servicing and MOT. This is awesome because it's from a coaching point of view. I deliver through Training Peaks, and they obviously have their training stress score monitor and critical training load and acute training load, and that gives you one sort of understanding, and there's a kind of skill to learning to read that for each of your athletes. And it's a bit like that guy in the Matrix who sees all the numbers and you're kind of going, okay, all right then, well there's the beautiful woman in the red dress. But to have the scientific backup of going, okay, right, someone's falling into the hole repeatedly here, let's find out what's going on in the blood, and from there we can, it's an opportunity for a proper intervention. And the thing you said about the 20 weeks out and 6 weeks out is really smart, I think, because that 6 weeks out period is traditionally where, you need to rest up a little bit because your coach is about to hit you with a really big weekend's training. Then you get a couple of weeks to recover and you get hit by, that ultimate 3 weeks of big training. And after that, it seems to be the perfect time for them to check their blood. I think what it is, there's a couple of arms to it, and there's a couple of flip sides to it, in that it just gives us, there's three components to it really. It's the first thing is to let us know as medics that everything is all right with this athlete. They are green to go. They are ready to race, and they can go in chipper that everything is good. And the second thing is that, something is de-optimized, like vitamin D or a B12 or, magnesium or red cell magnesium, just by target precision nutrition in that area, can that athlete pull out some form of marginal gain? Are they going to save themselves, 10 watts on the bike or 5 minutes over the run just by one little precision target hack? And I think that's nice for them because they go into the race with that extra kind of armory. But the third thing for them is the reassurance and the, psychological reassurance that they are fully serviced and everything is absolutely as they would want it to be. And I think that's really important for athletes, because doubt is so awful, and we often, we see it. We spoke about this before, about when events are won and lost, and like a time trial, it's always won and lost in the last 2 minutes of a 10 or last 5 minutes of a 25. And if you remove that doubt from the athlete that they could go into the final of the event, they could go into the final of the road race and literally give it all they've got because they know it's all working, it's really wonderful. And if we can engender that in people, our job's done.
That's it. It's all the mental strength of knowing that when they hit mile 18, mile 19 in the Ironman marathon, or they hit mile 9 in the half Ironman half marathon, those little doubts that are creeping in, it's one more thing you've taken care of. And I love that analogy of a service, because 2 weeks out before the race, you take your bike into the shop, you get the gear cables changed, you get a new chain put on to save those 5 or 6 watts. Absolutely, let's think about doing the same thing at the appropriate time with our blood markers, and that 6 weeks gives us enough time to make tweaks in nutrition that gets our body there in perfect shape. Yeah. And when we've spent hundreds and thousands of pounds on a race entry and flights and hotels, in the big scheme of things, you know, taking a magnesium supplement or going to the whole food shop isn't actually that big a deal, is it?
I know. The issue is just, it's a conceptual shift in thinking, and it's an education, and I think few people get it and understand it, and they've twigged and they say, right, I understand that, I get that. It's a lot, and we analogize with the guys over at Drag to Zero, Simon Smart, you know, how years ago when somebody was having a laugh and they decided to put a bike into a wind tunnel, see what happened. And now it's the standard. You know, you get, you know, the guys at, you know, pro teams who will use the facilities at Brackley for, you know, wind tunnel testing, because it's necessary now. And I think selling that sort of analysis to people early on with like the whole heart rate technology, or why would I get gait analysis or stuff like that? Yeah. It's just an innovation. I think when people twig and get it, they understand it, it then becomes a requirement for people.
Absolutely. And this is great, because I feel as though, like, I've stumbled into you right at the very start of this. You know, you're first to market in the UK. It's something that I've been wondering about for years and years. And maybe this is the first step in athletes getting access to affordable and most importantly, sort of information that they're going to understand and is going to put their mind at rest. Isn't it? That's the thing.
I think so.
So listen, we're coming to the end of our time here. I'm aware I've taken up much more of your time than I said I was going to. People want to learn more about your company. The web address is indurance.co.uk.
Absolutely.
I've got to say, it's a great website, actually. It's really well presented, and there's lots of interesting little graphs that appeal to my simple little brain.
Thank you.
Now, we talked about an offer, didn't we, for listeners of the show?
Yes, and
hit us with it. Come on,
the best thing to do in this case is, we are going through the whole, how do we actually do the tech behind the discount coding thing, and we're not quite there yet. So what I will do for people is, if they can email me on william.mangar, MANGAR, at indurance.co.uk, and if they can just quote that they're a listener on the Cup of Tri show, and they will receive the 5% discount on the already discounted prices that we have on our profiles and sites. If they go to our Facebook page, they will be able to see our launched profiles for long course and time trial, and these are appearing on the website over the next week. And with that email, they'll also get the 10% off the consultations as well. But I answer every email. It'd be nice for them to get a bit of personal contact, and we'll go from there. We won't kick out any kind of stock marketing emails or anything. It will be something personal from me.
Fantastic stuff. And what I'll do, I will put the links to your email address, the links to your site and your Facebook page up in the show notes of this one over oxygenaddict.com/podcast. So you guys can go straight through from there to make things a little bit easier. Listen, man, it's been awesome catching up with you. Thank you so much for your time.
I'd also like to compliment you on your podcast. It's excellent, and
thank you very much.
You know, you've got a really good way of interviewing people, and it's lovely. And I just wanted to say that.
Okay, really appreciate it. Well, listen, I hope we can catch up with you again. I'll be looking for you hanging out of the window of a fast-moving Jaguar car on the Tour of Britain at the end of the year. I wish you all the best with the company, mate. I think it's great on another level to meet people who are kind of making the jump into doing something in their work life that they really, really love, and it's great to see. You know, we've talked about this. We're both in a similar position with moving on from sort of one job to another.
Aren't we?
I think so, a little bit, mate. Yeah,
definitely.
So listen, thanks very much, and guys, if you want to go over and check out Will's company, the web address is Indurance, INDURANCE.co.uk, and you can contact Will at william.mangar, which is MANGAR, at endurance.co.uk. Will, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Take care of yourself. I hope you're ripping up and down on one of those time trialing courses sometime soon. And I hope we can catch up with you again in the near future and get an update with the company and with yourself as well.
Thank you, Rob. Take care to you, mate.
Take care of yourself. Speak again soon, buddy.
Bye.
Bye now.